he mocked my cheap dress at the gala, until the CEO yelled, "She's my fiancée!" The room was dazzling, filled with glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, but my dress felt like a spotlight on my insecurities. I had spent weeks hunting for something elegant, yet affordable, wanting to fit in without emptying my savings. When I walked into the gala, heads turned, not in admiration, but in judgment. Then he appeared, the man who always thought he was better than everyone else. He smirked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Is that really what you're wearing? It looks like you raided a thrift store." Laughter rippled around the room, some polite, some cruel. My cheeks burned. I tried to smile, pretending it didn't sting, but his words cut deeper than any cold shoulder. I felt invisible, small, like an outsider in a world I was desperate to belong to. Just as I was about to retreat, a voice thundered from across the room. "She's my fiancée." The CEO's declaration silenced the crowd instantly. All eyes snapped toward us. He walked up, took my hand firmly, and looked the mocker dead in the eye. "If you can't respect her here, you won't respect me anywhere." The air shifted, heavy with disbelief and newfound respect. For the first time that night, I felt seen, not for what I wore, but for who I was. And it changed everything. The mocker's expression shifted from amusement to shock as the CEO's words cut through the room like a blade. The gala guests, previously caught up in whispered gossip and sideways glances, now stared in stunned silence. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, not with judgment, but with a flicker of newfound respect. The CEO led me through the crowd, his hand warm and steady in mine, shielding me from the lingering whispers. I glanced around and saw familiar faces softened by surprise. Some friends smiled encouragingly, others nodded quietly, acknowledging what had just happened. The man who mocked me struggled to regain his composure, but the damage was done. His smirk faltered, replaced by an uneasy silence. The CEO didn't let it end there. He turned back to the crowd, his voice firm and clear. "We don't judge people by their clothes, but by their character." That moment shifted the entire atmosphere. The gala, which had felt like a trial by fashion, became a space where respect took center stage. I squeezed the CEO's hand, grateful not just for his protection, but for standing up to the cruelty I had endured silently for so long. It was a lesson I needed to hear, not from strangers, but from the man who loved me. That night, I learned the power of standing tall, even when the world tries to tear you down. And I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. I wanted to disappear. After the CEO's words, the gala felt different, less hostile, but my heart still pounded with anxiety. I kept wondering why he had to defend me so publicly. Was it because he saw something in me others didn't? Or because he knew how cruel those whispers could get? As we moved through the crowd, I noticed the subtle shifts, people no longer sneering or turning away, but offering polite nods and quiet smiles. It was a strange feeling, like walking through a storm and suddenly stepping into sunlight. But the man who mocked me, his confidence was gone. I caught him staring, unable to hide the realization that he had lost this battle. The CEO stayed close, his grip on my hand firm and reassuring. I felt safer than I had in a long time. That night wasn't just about a cheap dress or a hurt ego. It was about standing up against judgment and cruelty. It was about being seen for who I truly was beyond the surface. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. There was someone who believed in me fiercely, and that made all the difference. The gala was no longer a place of shame, but a turning point. A beginning of a new chapter where I could walk tall, no matter what others thought. After the gala, things didn't instantly change. The whispers slowed, but I still felt the weight of judgment lurking in the corners of every room I entered. My cheap dress had become a symbol, a reason for others to question my worth. But the CEO's declaration had planted a seed of confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. I started holding my head a little higher, reminding myself that who I was wasn't defined by fabric or price tags. At work, some colleagues treated me differently, some with newfound respect, others with quiet skepticism. I tried to focus on my goals, pushing past the doubts and the quiet criticism. One evening, the CEO invited me to a private dinner after a long day. We talked about everything and nothing, the gala, the people, our hopes. He told me he was proud to stand up for me, not because of appearances, but because of who I was. His words felt like a balm to my bruised spirit. I realized then that respect isn't just given, it's fought for and earned. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. The night ended with a promise, not just between us, but to myself, that I wouldn't let anyone's cruelty define my worth anymore. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing I wasn't alone. Days turned into weeks, and the lingering sting of that night at the gala slowly faded, replaced by a growing sense of strength. I started to invest more in myself, not in designer clothes or expensive accessories, but in believing in my own worth. The CEO's support wasn't just a moment, it became a foundation. He trusted me with more responsibilities, sought my opinion during meetings, and stood by me when whispers tried to creep back in. But not everyone was ready to let go of judgment. Some coworkers still glanced sideways or made subtle remarks when they thought I wasn't looking. I learned to ignore those shadows, focusing instead on the people who truly mattered. One afternoon, during a particularly stressful project, the CEO pulled me aside. "You've grown so much," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His encouragement fueled me, reminding me that resilience is more powerful than appearances. That night, I went home and looked in the mirror, not just seeing the dress I wore, but the woman who refused to be defined by it. I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and deadlines, the CEO invited me to sit down with him in a quiet corner of the office. The city lights filtered through the windows as we shared a rare moment away from the buzz of work. He reached out and took my hand gently, his eyes sincere. "I want you to know," he began, "that I see you, all of you. Not just the dress you wore at the gala or the judgments people make, but the person you are beneath it all." His words struck a chord deep inside me. For so long, I had felt invisible, reduced to appearances and whispers. Now, here was someone affirming my worth beyond the surface. We talked about the challenges, the hurtful moments, and the strength it took to keep moving forward. I realized that true respect is not about what others see at first glance. It's about understanding, acceptance, and support, especially when times are hard. The dress I wore at the gala, once a source of shame, now symbolized a turning point in my life. It reminded me that the darkest moments often lead to the strongest growth. Holding his hand, I felt a quiet confidence blossom inside me, a steady flame of self-worth that no mockery or doubt could extinguish. As the night deepened, I looked ahead with hope, not just for my relationship with him, but for myself. I was no longer afraid to stand tall, knowing that who I truly was mattered far more than what I wore. And with that realization, I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms and with newfound strength. The days following the gala were a mix of emotions. I felt a new sense of confidence growing, but the scars from past judgments didn't disappear overnight. At work, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Some colleagues began to treat me with a newfound respect, while others remained distant, their eyes lingering with skepticism. I focused on my work, determined to prove that I was more than appearances. The CEO continued to support me quietly, offering opportunities to take on bigger projects and involving me in strategic discussions. One afternoon, he invited me to a meeting with important clients, a chance to step beyond my usual role. The responsibility was daunting, but I embraced it with determination. Preparing for that meeting, I pored over every detail, rehearsing my points late into the night. When the day arrived, I stood before the room filled with executives, feeling the weight of expectations. As I spoke, my confidence grew with each word. The clients responded positively, and by the end, the deal was secured. The applause was more than just a professional win. It was personal validation. I had overcome not just the mockery at the gala, but years of doubt. Walking out of that room, I felt proud, not of a dress or a title, but of my resilience and strength. That moment marked a turning point, reminding me that true worth comes from within, not from what others say or think. It was a new beginning, one where I would no longer be defined by judgment, but by my own voice and actions. Following that successful presentation, I began to notice subtle shifts around me. Colleagues who had once been distant now greeted me with genuine smiles. Some even sought my advice on projects, and I found myself slowly becoming part of the team. The CEO's support became more visible. He praised my work openly in meetings and included me in important strategic discussions. Yet the rival who had mocked me at the gala wasn't ready to give up. She attempted small acts of sabotage, like leaving critical emails unanswered and scheduling meetings without my involvement. It was exhausting, but I refused to let it break my spirit. I leaned on close friends and mentors for encouragement and reminded myself why I had fought so hard to be seen. One day, the CEO stopped by my desk and said, "You've changed the narrative here. I'm proud of you." His words meant more to me than any promotion or raise. They were validation that I had reclaimed my power. With renewed determination, I continued to prove myself through hard work and integrity. The war wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. I realized that respect isn't given lightly, but earned through resilience and courage. And as I faced each day, I held on to the knowledge that my worth was no longer defined by others' judgments, but by my own strength and perseverance. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, the CEO invited me to join him for a quiet dinner away from the office. It wasn't a formal meeting, but a chance to talk openly without the usual distractions. We discussed the past, the accusations, the challenges, and the moments that had tested us both. He admitted his regrets, not only about how the situation was handled, but also about how he had allowed the rumors to spread unchecked. I shared my feelings of isolation and the strength it took to keep going despite the doubt. Our conversation was honest and raw, a rare moment of vulnerability from both of us. He apologized sincerely and promised to be a better leader, not just for the company, but for the people who believed in it. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment I felt hopeful. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had started to rebuild on a foundation of trust and respect. Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most unexpected growth. As I left that dinner, I realized I was no longer defined by others' narratives. I was writing my own story on my own terms. The months after that quiet dinner with the CEO were a mixture of challenges, growth, and reflection. I immersed myself in new projects and responsibilities, eager to prove my worth beyond the whispers and shadows that had haunted me. The CEO's support was present but subtle, never overbearing, always allowing me the space to develop and show my strength independently. Slowly, I began to build bridges with colleagues who had once kept their distance, finding allies where I hadn't expected. But the memory of the false accusations lingered, casting a long shadow over my confidence. One afternoon, out of the blue, I received a message from the rival, the woman who had mocked me publicly. The message was simple: "I hope you find peace." It wasn't an apology, nor was it a challenge. It was a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps the battle had taken its toll on us both. I didn't reply. Instead, I chose to focus on what mattered most: my work, my son, and the life I was determined to build beyond office politics and gossip. I realized something important. That truth doesn't just clear your name, it sets you free. And that freedom isn't about revenge or reclaiming what was lost. It's about resilience. It's about standing tall despite the scars. Each day, I grew stronger and more resolved not to let the judgments and whispers of others define me or my future. The past would always be a part of my story, but it would no longer control the narrative. This chapter, this new beginning, was mine to write. In the weeks that followed, the world around me seemed to shift subtly. People who had once viewed me with skepticism now offered quiet support, while others maintained their distance, wary of becoming involved in the lingering drama. I focused on my daily routines, folding laundry, caring for my son, and finding solace in the small moments of peace that life allowed. One morning, a package arrived at my door without a return address. Inside was a simple frame containing a calendar printout marking the day I was fired, the date circled in red. Beneath it was a handwritten note in the CEO's familiar script. The worst decision of my career, the beginning of everything that matters. I didn't cry, nor did I display it prominently. Instead, I tucked it away safely beside the hospital bracelet from my son's birth and the old company ID card I kept as a reminder. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, an unspoken admission that he was trying to make sense of what had been broken. Later that night, we shared a quiet dinner at home. Takeout spread across the floor while my son napped in his carrier. We laughed over spilled sauce and cold noodles, a strange mix of vulnerability and comfort. He asked, "Do you ever miss the life you had before all this?" I looked at him, thoughtful, and replied no. Because I didn't have a life, I had a role. He nodded slowly. And now, I said, I have something real, and I'm not letting anyone rewrite that ever again. One quiet evening, as I rocked Kai Jr. to sleep, I found myself sharing stories with him. Not fairy tales, but truths. I told him about strength, resilience, and new beginnings. I spoke of how I once sat in a boardroom, feeling invisible and unheard, until I made the choice to walk away and reclaim my voice. I told him how he was born on a rainy Wednesday with no fanfare or cameras. Just a mother who refused to let the world define his beginning by her ending. I wasn't sure if he'd ever understand the weight his name carried. But I wanted him to grow up knowing that names are more than labels. They're choices, markers of history, and sometimes symbols of redemption. The next day, Kai stopped by unexpectedly, carrying a box filled with parenting books, bedtime stories, and a thin notebook. Inside the notebook were his notes, observations, questions, and reflections from every visit he'd made. On the first page he had written, "I can't undo what I erased, but I can learn to be present for what's still unfolding." For the first time, I believed he was becoming more than just a man trying to fix a mistake. He was learning to show up, imperfectly, without applause. He didn't ask for another chance with me, and I didn't offer one. But we sat together on the floor, with our son between us, reading aloud and laughing at our mistakes. In that small, quiet moment, I realized we weren't rewriting the past. We were building a new chapter, one where my voice wasn't silenced, my child wasn't hidden, and the man who once fired me was learning to father the very person who carried his name. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Kai Jr. grew stronger every day, his laughter filling the apartment like warm sunlight breaking through clouds. I watched him learn to crawl and then walk, each milestone a quiet victory. The CEO and I maintained a cautious distance, communicating mostly through shared care routines and occasional texts about appointments or supplies. One evening, as Kai held our son for the first time without hesitation, he looked at me with softened eyes and said, "I don't want to miss any more moments." I nodded, knowing that healing is messy and slow, but possible. I still carried the scars, the loss of my job, the betrayal, the loneliness of those early months, but now I carried hope. Hope that my son would know his worth isn't defined by the mistakes of others. Hope that he'd grow up seeing a mother who fought, not just for him, but for herself. One day, Kai Jr. will ask about his name, and when he does, I'll tell him everything, not just the pain, but the love, complicated, imperfect, and fiercely real, that made him who he is. Because in the end, it's not how a story begins, but how it's told. And I'm ready to tell ours with honesty, strength, and the voice I never lost. One quiet afternoon, while Kai Jr. napped, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures from before the pregnancy, candid moments with Kai at work events, blurry shots from company parties where we smiled but never spoke about what was happening beneath the surface. I realized how much of my life had been compartmentalized, hidden away in folders and memories I rarely revisited. Yet here was my son, asleep in the next room, a living reminder that those chapters weren't the end of my story. I texted Kai something simple: "Thank you for showing up." His reply came quickly, learning every day. For him, it wasn't much, but it meant everything. That small exchange felt like a fragile bridge, unsteady but real. I don't know where this path will lead us. Maybe someday we'll heal enough to call each other family again. Maybe not. But the weight of the past no longer drags me down. I carry it with me, sure, but it doesn't define me. Instead, I choose the moments I create now, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the bedtime stories weaving our own narrative. And for the first time, I feel free. Not because the CEO recognized his son, nor because my name was cleared, but because I found my voice. And that voice will never be silenced again. The last moment of closure came unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, a package arrived at my door. No sender's name, just my address written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a photo album filled with old, unseen pictures of Kai holding me during a company retreat, laughing with colleagues, and from the early days when we believed in something more. Along with it was a letter, brief and honest. "I can't change the past, but I want to be part of his future. Thank you for naming him Kai. It means more than you know." I sat on the floor with the album in my lap, rain tapping the windows, feeling a mix of sadness and peace. That was the last thread tying me to the man who once erased me. It wasn't an apology or a promise. It was a quiet acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. I closed the album gently and looked over at Kai Jr., now playing with his blocks, his laughter filling the room. This story isn't about perfect endings or fairy tales. It's about survival, truth, and the messy, beautiful journey of reclaiming yourself. And as long as I have my voice and him, I know the future is ours to write, no matter what it holds.